On the morning of January 22nd, 1943, Second Lieutenant John George crouched inside a ruined bunker on Guadalcanal, staring through a rifle scope his fellow officers had spent 6 weeks mocking. At 27 years old, the former Illinois state champion had exactly 0 confirmed combat kills. But in the dense coastal groves surrounding Point Cruz, the situation was desperate. 11 Japanese snipers had systematically paralyzed the 132nd Infantry Regiment, killing 14 American soldiers in less than 3 days. George's commander had dismissed his weapon as a toy. Others called it his mail-order sweetheart. It was a civilian Winchester Model 70, equipped with a 2.5x Lyman Alaskan optic. While the standard military M1 Garand was a semi-automatic 8-round weapon, George's hunting rifle was a 5-round bolt-action civilian target model. He had saved 2 years of National Guard pay to buy it, even arranging for it to be forwarded via military mail when the unit shipped out without it. The tactical reality on Guadalcanal had shifted.
The heavy bunker warfare of Mount Austin was over, replaced by a deadly cat-and-mouse game in the Point Cruz jungle. Imperial Japanese soldiers had dug into massive banyan trees, some 90 feet tall with trunks 8 feet thick. Armed with scoped Arisaka Type 98 rifles, these snipers waited invisibly in the canopy, picking off Americans filling canteens or conducting routine patrols. With casualties mounting faster than malaria cases, the battalion commander gave George until morning to prove his civilian rifle could actually perform. George spent the night stripping down the Winchester, clearing away the ocean transit grime, and loading 5 rare rounds of civilian .30-06 hunting ammunition he had packed back in Tennessee. At dawn, he occupied a captured bunker overlooking the groves, carrying no radio and no spotter, just his rifle, a canteen, and 60 rounds of ammunition.
Using the modest magnification of his scope to filter out the overwhelming visual noise of the jungle, George scanned the canopy. At 0917, he caught a sudden, unnatural twitch in a branch 240 yards away, 87 feet up in a banyan tree. Through the glass, the silhouette materialized, a Japanese sniper positioned where 3 massive branches intersected, tracking the American supply trail. George dialed 2 clicks for wind, stabilized his breathing, and squeezed the ultra-smooth 3.5-pound trigger he had tuned before the war. The rifle cracked. 240 yards out, the sniper jerked violently, plummeted 90 feet through the branches, and hit the jungle floor. Knowing Japanese snipers operated in mutually supporting pairs, George immediately scanned the surrounding trees. At 0943, he spotted the second soldier 60 yards north, scrambling 50 feet down a trunk to relocate. George led the moving target and fired again.
2 shots, 2 dead snipers. Part 2. The sniper duel escalates. The absolute silence of George's position didn't last. At 11:21, an enemy bullet slammed into the sandbag just 6 inches from his face, showering his eyes with dirt. A third sniper, operating from the southwest, had spotted his muzzle flash. Following classic sniper doctrine, George waited out the initial danger, then carefully scanned the new sector. At 11:38, he spotted the shooter 73 feet up in a cluster of banyans. The enemy soldier had changed branches but stayed in the same tree, a fatal tactical error. George aligned the crosshairs and dropped him instantly. By noon, George had eliminated 5 snipers. The mockery from his platoon vanished, replaced by awe as infantrymen asked to watch him work. George refused, knowing that crowds attracted mortar-fire. The next morning, January 23rd, brought torrential tropical rain. When the downpour cleared at 8:15, George spotted his 6th target at 0912, a sniper who had used the rain to mask his climb into a tree 290 yards away. George compensated for the increased distance and fired, scoring another clean kill. However, the Japanese forces were adapting. At 09:57, a mortar crew triangulated George's position. The first salvo landed 40 yards short. The second closed the gap to 20 yards. Recognizing the bracket pattern, George grabbed his Winchester and bolted northward just seconds before a third mortar salvo obliterated his bunker.
Undeterred, George established a new firing position behind a massive fallen tree 120 yards away. The hunt had evolved from simple target interdiction into a direct, personal duel. By the end of the afternoon, George had claimed his 7th and 8th kills, tracking one shooter 94 feet high against the changing angle of the afternoon sky. His 2-day record stood at 12 rounds fired, 8 confirmed kills, and 4 misses. Part 3. The Ambush at the Machine Gun Nest. On January 24th, only 3 of the original 11 Japanese snipers remained in the sector. These were the veterans, the smartest, most disciplined survivors, who now knew exactly what George's rifle sounded like. Anticipating that the enemy would target his previous positions, George bypassed both the ruined bunker and the fallen log. Instead, he slipped into an abandoned marine machine gun nest nestled inside a cluster of heavy rocks 70 yards south. As the morning rain slowed to a drizzle, George spotted a sniper just 40 feet up in a palm tree, 190 yards out.
The palm fronds provided an excellent natural blind from the ground, but George's elevated position allowed him to look straight down into the hide, exposing the soldier's head and shoulders. George took aim, but hesitated. The remaining snipers were highly trained. They wouldn't expose themselves this easily unless it was a trap. Lowering his rifle, George scanned the perimeter for the real threat. 11 minutes later, he found it, a banyan tree 80 yards northwest of the palm. Hidden behind dense vines 91 feet up, a second Japanese sniper was completely focused on George's old position at the fallen tree, waiting to kill him the moment he fired at the decoy. George used the trap against them. He fired a single round into the decoy in the palm tree, dropping him instantly. The moment the hidden sniper shifted his weight to track the sound of the shot, the movement betrayed his exact location. Before the enemy could fully bring his rifle to bear, George swung his Winchester and fired a second time, neutralizing the primary threat. Knowing the double blast had compromised the rocks, George abandoned the position and crawled into a muddy, water-filled drainage ditch 40 yards away. 6 seconds later, a Japanese machine gun crew raked the rocks with heavy fire. George relocated a final time, slipping into a water-filled shell crater 100 yards east, submerging himself up to his chest while holding his Winchester vertically out of the mud. Part 4. Hunting the Hunters. With 10 snipers down, the final survivor abandoned the canopy entirely. At 09:47, George caught movement at the edge of his vision. The 11th sniper was on the ground, utilizing thick ferns and undergrowth to crawl parallel to the tree line. He was actively tracking George's escape route from the rocks. George remained perfectly frozen in the muddy water.
At 10:03, the Japanese soldier stepped directly into the abandoned rock position, aiming his rifle east toward the drainage ditch, completely exposing his back to George's actual location, just 38 yards away. Yet George held his fire. A veteran who had survived weeks of frontline infantry operations would not step blindly into an exposed rock nest alone. George expanded his field of view and discovered a second Japanese infantryman hidden 70 yards northwest behind a fallen trunk, providing overwatch for the man in the rocks. The last sniper had brought tactical backup. Because a bolt-action rifle required physical manipulation between shots, George couldn't engage both before the second could react. He submerged entirely, leaving only his eyes above the waterline, and waited. Believing the area was clear, The two Japanese soldiers stepped out after 10 minutes and began a coordinated sweep eastward, walking right past George's crater. The moment their backs were turned, George rose silently from the water. He dropped the closer soldier at 42 yards, cycled the bolt, and shot the second Overwatch marksman before the man could finish turning. 11 snipers were dead, but the gunfire instantly drew an enemy infantry patrol out of the tree line. At least 6 regular infantrymen converged on the bodies. George slipped back into the muddy water, but the patrol spotted his fresh boot prints leading directly to the crater. When the lead soldier reached the rim and looked down, George shot him from the water. He cycled the action submerged, rose up, and dropped 2 more soldiers attempting to storm the crater rim. With only 3 rounds left in his rifle and his ammunition clips left behind at the rocks, George scrambled out the back of the crater and sprinted north under heavy, uncoordinated retaliatory fire. He broke contact, hid in a dry crater to regroup, and slipped back into the American perimeter by 11:13. Part 5. The Birth of the Sniper Section. George provided a full debriefing to Captain Morris. 11 snipers neutralized, 3 infantrymen killed, and the Winchester action heavily fouled with mud and water. The Point Cruz groves were entirely cleared, allowing the battalion to advance east as the Japanese forces initiated a full evacuation of Guadalcanal. Instead of facing disciplinary action for using an unauthorized civilian rifle, George was summoned to division headquarters by the regimental commander, Colonel Ferry. Ferry asked if George could replicate his success on a larger scale.
George agreed under one condition. He would keep his Winchester Model 70, while his trainees would be issued 14 specialized Springfield rifles equipped with inertial scopes left behind by the Marines. On January 27th, George assembled 40 expert marksmen 2 miles east of Henderson Field. While these men had excellent range qualifications with iron sights, none had formal sniper training or camouflage experience. George trained them on the fundamentals of field stability, trigger control, and reading wind conditions through high-powered glass. He organized them into structured 2-man shooter and spotter teams to ensure security and eliminate single points of tactical failure. On February 1st, George took 4 of these newly minted teams across the Matanaka River to interdict Japanese infantry stragglers. Operating from high ground with his spotter, Corporal Hayes, George claimed 6 more enemy soldiers. By the end of the day, the sniper section had eliminated 23 enemy combatants, with 0 friendly casualties.
By the time the Guadalcanal campaign officially concluded on February 9th, George's small sniper section had accumulated 74 confirmed kills. George was recommended for the Bronze Star, but his war was far from over. During his recovery from a minor shoulder wound sustained near the Tanamboa River, Pacific Command issued a call for experienced jungle warfare officers for a highly classified long-range penetration mission. George volunteered immediately. By March, he was aboard a transport ship heading west across the Pacific, with his Winchester Model 70 securely packed in the cargo hold. He was heading to India to join a newly formed elite unit that history would remember by a terrifying name: Merrill's Marauders.